Thank you, sir, for those absolutely wonderful remarks. May I now request His Excellency, Shri M.K. Narayanan, to offer a few words.
Mr. Sunil Kilnani, Dr. Pratap Banu Mehta, my distinguished senior, Mr. Brajesh Mishra, Mr. Shyam Saran, and Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, and Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Sandwiched between the current National Security Advisor and the distinguished predecessor of mine, Mr. Brajesh Mishra, I feel like an extinguished National Security Advisor. So I hope you'll pardon me if my remarks do not really fit the persona of a National Security Advisor. I wish, however, to compliment Mr. Sunil Kilnani, distinguished historian, who I believe is now at the King's Institute in London, and of course the formidable team of co-authors for this very excellent work, their excellent analysis, and the extensive research that has gone into it, producing a document that lays out the opportunities that India enjoys, identifies the challenges and threats it is likely to confront, and sets out the broad perspective and approach that India should adopt to advance its interests. It is therefore with a great deal of trepidation that I dare question some of the assumptions which are given here. Shankar did mention, and I would go along with that, that somehow the document talks of a strategic consensus and an overlapping consensus as perhaps one of the reasons why India's foreign and strategic policies appear inadequate and weak in the face of the current realities. I know that the authors are not alone in reaching this conclusion. Many others in the past have made the same comment. In my opinion, this is debatable, and if I understood, I think Shankar shares that view. But I do not wish to contest it here. I shall leave that for the debate later. It has been argued previously, and I think many of the people who are present in this room have themselves articulated this from time to time, that Indian policymakers see the absence of a grand strategy, or rather the non-revelation of a grand strategy, as a strategy in itself. India's long passive tradition and legacy of non-aggression perhaps lend support to such a viewpoint. Throughout history, India has refrained from a demonstration of its might, and while this has been commented upon unfavorably, I might suggest that this approach not be brushed aside as being of little consequence. I do think that it merits some amount of informed discussion. I think all of us here are aware that the exercise of power outside a country's borders involves much more than the mere will to do so. It necessitates, among other things, deployment of scarce resources. Until recently, independent India could hardly contemplate such a possibility, excepting in the most exceptional of circumstances, utilizing scarce resources to leverage the international situation in the manner that was so brilliantly mentioned by Mr. Sunil Kilnani, meant that this is something of an unaffordable luxury for a country like ours. I agree that Asia's resurgence in the 21st century has brought about a dramatic shift in the global balance of power. The simultaneous rise and emergence of India and China on the world stage is today a salient factor driving strategic interests and policies in Asia and beyond. And the underlying theme of this document is therefore that we do not have the same affordable luxury of following passive traditions. I would go along with this, accepting that before doing so, not being a diplomat, rather having spent most of my life in intelligence, I tend to ask questions. And I think I have a number of caveats. Let me try and list them one by one. One is that given that many strategic thinkers and others believe that South Asia today, together with China, has perhaps the highest potential for conflict, mainly over regional hegemony and leadership within the region, and also lacking the kind of subsystems that are available elsewhere, in Europe for instance, there are chances of a miscalculation which could lead to conflict. Somewhere, if I understood, the document says that India should develop a repertoire of instruments to signal and, where necessary, establish that there would be a serious cost to attempts to coerce Indian judgments or actions. I wonder whether in this sort of highly volatile situation and circumstance, would such an action not aggravate the chances of miscalculation leading to a conflict? Can we afford such a situation? Next, there was a reference to China. I think China has been dealt with fairly extensively in this document. But I feel at the end of it that I'm not quite sure what is the answer to deal with China's vaulting ambitions, the implications of current efforts of Chinese scholars to foster Chinese exceptionalism, China's aggressive diplomacy, and its actions in our neighborhood. At one level, if I understand, Sunil did mention that we need to carry the battle into their territory. At another level, there's talk of a skillful blend of diplomacy and other matters. I think this is going to be one of our most important challenges. And such a distinguished panel, I think, should give us a more detailed or more realistic understanding of what we need to face. Because I think we sometimes tend to underestimate China. Sometimes I think there is a tendency to overestimate the threat from China. One word about the border. I hope Shankar would bear me out on this. I think China prefers a waiting game, but I think the desire to maintain peace and tranquility on the border appears genuine. There is a point I wish to make here. I think somewhere, again in the document, I read only the draft. I didn't get a chance to go through the final. If it's been corrected, I'm sorry. I will apologize for that. Somewhere in the document, there was a reference to a point about Chinese superiority along the border. I wish to make the point that this is hardly a given. There are areas on the border where Indian troops today are in a more advantageous position. I have a problem, I had it when I was the NSA also, about the constant need to make unilateral concessions to all our neighbors, whether it is on trade, investment, or aid. The idea is being that our smaller neighbors need reassurance all the time, and so on. I know this is unexceptionable, but having spent a fair amount of time looking at India from the inside rather than from the outside, I think that India's capacities are not unlimited. They are finite. There are many internal requirements and pressures that need to be met and taken into account, which cannot